Great, welcome. Hello, good evening, everyone. Hello to our friends virtual. Hi, John. Hi, Kyle. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So do we need to do a roll call?
Yes. Alyssa Newsom, Desiree Simmons,
Here.
Lisa Volker,
Here.
John Lusk,
Here virtually.
Tegwin John,
Here.
Alice Elliott,
Here.
Steve Wilcoxon.
Present.
With 5 present and 2 absent, there is a quorum.
Okay, so then we just want to move on to approving the agenda. I've both had a chance to take a look at it.
I move to approve the agenda.
Do I have a second? A second. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Motion passes. Next, we have public comment. Is there anyone who is interested in speaking?
We don't have currently anyone attending in person, but there is one person attending virtually. If you would like to make comment, please raise your hand. You'll have 3 minutes to address the committee. Seeing no hands raised, if it pleases the committee, you can move on to the next agenda item.
Great, we're moving on to the discussion items. So first up, we have the minutes, approving minutes from the March 3rd meeting. Welcome, hello, Alyssa. Has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes?
Move to approve the minutes from the last meeting, March 7th.
There might be a small typo in item 4, TWO instead of TO.
Any other changes to the minutes? We have Steve moved it. We have a second. Second. All those in favor? Aye. All right, minutes are approved. All right, so our next discussion item is talking about potential community benefits for the 945 Clark Road CDA. And so we have on here, we had a list of the potential benefits that folks talked about at our meeting in February. And so we can kind of look at those. So those are listed on page 5 and 6 of our agenda for today. You can see what those look like. I also wanted to just make a thought. So I know one, we can kind of just, I think, keep it open like this. I know at our last meeting, we had the conversation about the meeting, going into the meeting of the whole and then coming out to make votes. And I think that if we wanted to do that, I would suggest or propose that we kind of stay in the meeting of the whole and keep note of where we have decision points and then just come out of it one time in order to go through the actual votes. So that will be one thing to do as opposed to kind of having to go in and out. So if we wanted to do that, then we can kind of stay in and just make our note of like when we have our things that we have to vote on and then come out and do all the votes at one time. Would that be allowed?
So that wouldn't really follow Robert's Rules of Order. Based off you're not going in order of the agenda. So it's best if you can just avoid the committee of the whole and just have open discussion if the committee's okay with that.
Okay. We can kind of proceed as we are. Yes, Steve?
No, I'm all in.
Oh, great. Okay, so we can just do that then, all right? Great, thank you. So, yeah, I don't know if we want to kind of go through and look at each of the sections, if we want to do it kind of section by section, or if folks want to talk about some of the different benefits in particular, and then we can try to think about how we might prioritize some of them or what questions we have about them. And then I'm sure we'll have some stuff that we want to ask Kyle probably directly maybe, or talk about in particular. That sounds good.
Yeah, I just didn't see anything specifically on that. I guess I know that last time we had talked about some stuff that wasn't necessarily on that list. I know a lot of us cared a lot about AMI and stuff. So I feel like that would be, I got the sense that was going to be a long conversation, which was important to tackle at some point.
Yeah, the AMI, so that is the one that's under
Oh, that's under
number,
affordability. Or,
yeah, the one that's like changed metric for affordable.
oh, I totally didn't see it. There's a thing in the back. Never mind. Sorry.
No. There's a lot here. And so what I thought that, because we talked about a lot of some things that were specific and some of them overlapped.
Yeah.
So what I thought was that if we talked about kind of going through the list that we have and start kind of determining some things with that, that'll make the discussion under C maybe go a lot quicker because we'll have covered some of those things, and then we'll have some things that will, yeah. No, we want to make sure to cover all the things that are important. So that's what I think I want to try to get a sense of as we look at these, like what things kind of rise up for us and based on conversations with the community and things like that. So.
So you're going through it in order to do it.
Okay. So the first area here, we have providing either on-site or off-site additional recreational activities, parks, open space, public service enhancements, or public infrastructure improvements for the city of Ypsilanti and its residents. This includes public transportation services and infrastructure. And I know one thing that I have been saying when talking about this too, in part because I was trying to remind myself about it, but just for everybody that's kind of watching, that the when we're talking about the benefits too, that it's not just for things at the site, it's also thinking about citywide. So just as we're going through this, that for us to keep that in mind too. John, I see your hand is up.
Sure. Sometime, and it doesn't have to be tonight's meeting, next meeting's fine. One of the things I wrestle with is, do we have a target cost or a target dollar value we're aiming at? I mean, it will help shape where we're going. And so I'd like to make sure that at some time we include a discussion about the dollar value we're talking about. Is it 100,000? Is it 50,000? Is it $1 million? Is it 2 million? Now, I have no idea. So perhaps city could guide us, et cetera. I know they say that we're giving away, what was the number? 28 million. But that's over time, and there's net present value of money and all that kind of stuff. And I understand that, but I don't know what our target value or scope or range we're talking about. I never have. So thank you.
No, I want to, I'm just going to the ordinance because it does specify that as we look at the benefits that we're looking at the level of the incentive as we're determining it. So I'm just trying to find the language on that. If anybody else finds it, there is something in here that does say that specifically.
Desiree, can I kind of give a little bit, and reviewing the ordinance at great length and reviewing all the other community benefits agreements that we've seen throughout the country. The vast majority of benefits are benefits that are done not with a specific cost in mind. And then there's a penalty if those benefits are not actually achieved. So that's how most benefits ordinances have actually gone through. So it's not like the developer's asking for 25 million. They have to provide 25 million in incentive. It's, we want local hiring, we want the local parks and rec, and really it might actually be helpful at our next meeting to really pull some of the community benefits agreements to see how they are actually structured throughout the country, which Mr. Barr and myself have actually started to do just to get prepared for some of these. So there's not a direct proportion. It does talk about the incentive, but it doesn't talk about the proportion of the cost, because the benefits aren't always a cash payment.
Aren't always the cash. Is
And
that-
for the most part, they're actually not cash payments.
Okay,
For the most part,
that was my-
it's providing services like affordable housing and like green infrastructure and like local hiring. That's what the benefits typically are, to make sure that local hiring kind of will happen as part of this project. So that's what they've been in the past with all the other community benefits agreements through in Detroit and in Philadelphia and in LA.
Yeah, and I'll just say too that, yeah, I'm saying like projects may include direct funding to the city of Ypsilanti or other relevant stakeholders and et cetera. And I'm still trying to find, but I would say too that I would like to, I think it is good. I think it's good to probably look at some other CBAs, of course, and to also recognize that they're not necessarily all strong and they're not all necessarily successful. And I know folks in Detroit also have raised a lot of questions and concerns and have not necessarily seen, you know, there's not a lot of accountability always in them too. So I just want to say, like, I think it's good for us to look at examples and also to recognize that, you know, we don't necessarily want to just like set that as the minimum bar. Tywin?
I have a question, which would be, what are the methods of ensuring accountability? You said that they're often not cash payments, which makes sense. You know, I would throw one out there. I'd love to see a benefit of having this development really explicitly ensure some degree of resident governance. That would be incredible. You can't put a dollar sign on that, but how, you know, if we were to agree to that, what are the mechanisms for ensuring that that continues for the duration of the pilot?
So essentially, this is working with the developer to create something like that gets put into a contract. So there's gonna be a contract with the developer in the city. If, you know, there always has to be certain clauses if the residents choose not to do a resident thing. We can't force the developer to do that, but so long as there's the will and you know, so many tries to do that, if the developer kind of comes in and says, no way, we're not doing it, then there's either a fine or a or revoking of the pilot. So that's how all of these agreements are. There's, like I said, it's a fine, which is typically when you see the cash payments, when something wasn't lived up to. And sometimes, you know, community benefits process, which I agree, have not always been successful in Detroit, where they require, you know, it's everyone always talks about it, but where they require 30 master plumbers that live in the city of Detroit to work on this project, and there's only 3 master plumbers in the city of Detroit, so there's a cash payment. That's not what we want to do here. I'm assuming, and just hearing you want to make sure that this is the best development for the city, and we're getting the proper things, but most of it is, like I said, like you said, the things you want to see, there's no cash, but there will have to be a fine attached to it, or just relocation.
Yeah, there's just, you know, plenty of instances of great ideas being put out there and then absolutely no enforcement on every level of government, so.
And there has to be, the city ends up being the enforcer. And there's no other way, because this is an agreement with the city and the developer. So there has to be some trust there, but we typically do make sure our contracts are.
Could I ask, not to take us too far off this agenda list, but could I ask in a follow-up sort of, can someone describe like the origination story of this development? Why there, why now?
Would the chair mind if Mr. Brazzers talks there? I do want to wait for that. That's not me.
So,
Go for it. We're in open conversation. So go ahead, Kyle.
You guys want me to chime in here? Okay. Hi. Good evening,
hi,
everybody.
Kyle.
Hi, Kyle.
Well, why here? Why now? Okay, good question. I work for Lincoln Avenue Capital. We're a national affordable housing developer. We develop affordable housing across the country. And we are invested in the communities in which we develop, long-term owner and developer. We have, I have been involved in several upper Midwest markets, and I have been looking in some areas in and around Ann Arbor. I was introduced to this site last kind of fall or summer. And I started conversations with the city. So, you know, the type of development that's before you is what we do. We don't develop things other than multifamily housing. We don't develop things other than really affordable multifamily housing. So kind of the program is what we do. The identified need was, you know, an area that has a demonstrated need for affordable housing. And then in speaking with members of city staff, this was an identified site that was zoned for multifamily and the city wanted to see multifamily. In speaking with other members of the broader community, there was a strong need for both affordable family and affordable senior, because there had been senior development that was affordable that was converted to market rate a number of years ago. I think that was actually alluded to during the last meeting. So it was kind of a confluence of multiple items. And then in working in partnership with the city from the start, we were able to come up with a site plan and a site concept that was in line with the city's requests or the city's kind of guidance on multifamily and density. And it worked. We think it will work financially with inclusion of the pilot and things like that. So it's just kind of a confluence of those factors. And then in, you know, trying to meet the needs and trying to provide additional affordable housing where it's needed across the country.
Can I ask one more follow-up question, and then I promise I will stop. So was there any other location ever considered in this, within our jurisdiction?
Not within the city of Ypsilanti.
Okay.
To be fair to Kyle, there is no other site of this size
Okay.
outside of Water Street, which Mishta wouldn't allow for a private development like this.
Mishta wouldn't allow for, before it's cleaned, like it would
For the entire
require
property, so they need it, what, 10 acres? Is that what you need, Kyle?
10 acres.
Is that?
We needed, this is it's a 15-acre site. I think we needed about 12.
Okay,
Um,
so you would need roughly a third of Water Street,
Mhm.
but cleaning up all of Water Street to Mishta standards would make this development possible.
Okay. And I'm so sorry, one more. Is there any consideration to cut the development in half and downsize it 50%? Would that be a feasible thing to propose as a community benefit? And I'll explain myself in this. The area to me begs a lot of critique. I do like the idea of having affordable, like Kyle, you seem like probably one of the better developers to work with on this. And so it seems like a good development. I just feel I have a lot of reservations about the actual location. And I don't want to derail us at all, but I wanted to say that. And that's where my questions were coming from.
if I can't speak to the feasibility of a development cut in half just here off the cuff.
Right.
What I can tell you is knowing the development that's put before this committee that we've applied for, there isn't a way to like cut it in half in density and make it still work. I also think that that's not in, my understanding is that's not in keeping with the designated density goals of the city, but that I'm sure depends on who you talk to. What I would be curious though, I mean, can you share more about your concern with the specific location?
Yeah, so when I went over there and looked, I realized that I was thinking that the water is like, I don't know if I'm right. The erosion that I saw on the west side of that area was more concern to me than I realized, because I was thinking the erosion would be the opposite direction. But that's only just one concern, and it's such a small patch of green space. It honestly is critical to the watershed, and in the next decade, we're gonna find that that's a very critical waterfront green space, I think, is my prediction. I'm not an ecologist. But my major concern is there are several apartment complexes already back there.
Mhm.
They range in degree from caretaking. And so when we talk about this development, there's going to be another density back there. To me, it worries me in terms of a consistent pattern of like tubing the density on the edges of the city and then imposing infrastructure that's not necessarily needed when density could be built in different places. Obviously, like Joe, I don't know, I don't have the city planning knowledge to understand if I'm like completely off base, but those are my general concerns. And the biggest community benefit would be if you could assure that this development will not crumble and it will be taken care of.
Oh, so when you say crumble, you mean deteriorate over time and not be upkept?
Yeah,
not
that's
be
what's
kept up.
happening back there now.
Yeah.
There's already several apartments
is.
that are affordable back there, and they're available to some degree, not for several people, but they are available and they aren't taken care of. And I know that that's really messy and hairy because whose responsibility is it? And you guys are different because you're more of you're a private entity, but you're dealing a lot with federal and public funds. So you're a little bit different than like a for-profit developer. I recognize that.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly be open to discussing language in the community benefits agreement around upkeep and maintenance and street presence or whatever you would want to call that. We take a lot of pride in maintaining our developments, and one of the challenges with any kind of long-term development ownership is that costs rise at a certain rate and rents rise at another rate. And in affordable housing like this, your rents are capped and the amount in which they can increase over time is capped. But there are mechanisms for doing capital repairs. We reserve money every year, as part of that. And so we take a lot of pride in making sure that our properties are well maintained, and you would not see our property turn into some of what you're seeing on the adjacent sites. I hope that the development of this site will bring some reinvestment in those properties, because when you have a brand new neighbor, it can often make a lot of those issues bring them even more to the forefront. It's even easier to see the kind of disparity in upkeep and things like that. And I know the city can only do so much to enforce code violations, and Joe can probably talk about that a lot more. But if I would be happy to talk about language in the agreement relating to upkeep of our community, because it won't get anywhere near what you're seeing next door. But those are just words. And if we can put something in there that would make people more comfortable, I would be happy to talk about that.
Yeah, and it's not the people, I just wanted to set on public record. This is zero critique of the people who live there. This is a full critique of the development and the city. No, I know that you guys have a lot of constrictions that we can't see as well. Thank you very much, Kyle. I appreciate your entertaining those questions.
So I think that one of the things to John's original question, and maybe again for us to think about, but I'd like to kind of talk about some of these specific benefits too. Might be for us, once we kind of get a sense of I think what kind of things we prioritize, and then we can have a conversation, I think, about what that means in terms of how this stacks up in terms of the balance of the incentive and things like that, and how that stacks up with what's already in the plan in terms of the benefits that Kyle and his team has put forward, and kind of see what that balance looks like. I think that that's part of what we're supposed to do as a committee overall, is to get a sense of what's being proposed, what things feel like it would be a benefit for the city and like how that balances. Because it's very possible that a developer can come forward, put something in front of us, we could look at it and say, that looks like a great benefit. We would just say, keep up the good work, right? Like that could be an outcome. And so I think that that's something for us to kind of determine as we look at it. So, yeah, does that sound okay? John?
Sure, thanks. Two things. One is the past development here, I think it was about 12 or 15 years ago. Somebody looked at the site and said it's the last virgin forest in the county. Sort of interesting. So wanted to reflect on that, and that here again, that's the ecological thing. But maybe somebody knows the answer to this. You know, we had that Chinese development here 3-4 years ago. That's about right.
Proposed development didn't happen, right?
Yeah, it was going to do River Street. How did they solve the MISTA problem?
Well, they were gonna develop the whole site. So I think that that's part of it, right, is that in order, and they weren't actually looking to get funding from MISTA either. Is that correct, Joe?
Well, no, but I mean, they were
So
going to
it's
build
a
something.
it's a different funding mechanism. They were looking to get funding using EB 440 visas. So it was like private funding as opposed to public funding.
Well, okay, so you're saying the problem we have here is the public funding part and them using Water Street receiving public money. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
MISTA has different requirements. So that's what
Fine.
it sounds like.
I just wondered how one site could do it and another site couldn't, and you've explained it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So what, do we want to go through these section by section, or would folks like to lift up any particular ones that like stand out to you that you want to just have more discussion about? That you would see as some priority and we can talk about, Taylor?
I wanna highlight the fact that I see this as like, there are two sort of broad categories of community benefits here. There's the benefits for the people who will be living in this development, for our neighbors who are looking for affordable places to live that are hopefully also nice places to live. And then there's also benefits for people out in the broader community. I mean, maybe it's kind of a, maybe there's a couple stages in there where there's some benefits that could benefit the neighbors, some benefits that could benefit anybody who lives in the watershed and who, values living in a town that has beautiful intact forests and all the wonderful benefits that come with that. So I just want to bring up that I'd like to see kind of a balance and see some benefits going to all of those sorts of levels of the community. Yeah, that's all I want to say now.
What I'll do too, and I mean, anybody else can as well, I'll try to, as we talk about them, kind of think about where they might fit in that way, and then we can kind of get a sense of what that looks like.
Just a quick question I have, and maybe I glossed over this in all the documents. Is there any document that functions as a strategic plan for the site in terms of, I'm referring to in terms of strategic plan?
There's a PUD, also plan unit development, that was submitted a site plan to planning commission. It's a very large document, so you'll receive. No, it's a little different. I think that's what it is, but there's like the whole document that you will receive. But there's not a strategic plan as far as what I think of as a strategic plan. I think there might be differences that.
Just a strategic plan, just kind of being a live sort of document that lays out the goals of this project and this development over the course of 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, and so on and so forth. And that tends to include things like this because some of these benefits look great. It's just I'm wondering what conversations are had about, each section of longevity.
I don't might have more information on it.
Kyle, did you have a document that kind of?
I'm sorry. Could you
Is there-
repeat that?
You taking your microphone?
Can I-
Is there a strategic plan document for this? Because I see separate documents like proposed developments, budget, things like that, but is there a broader strategic plan that kind of encompasses this and discusses all this, or are they just kind of separate documents that are being referred to? Does that make sense?
I'm not, let's see, I'm not sure if I'm following, but are you asking if there's a consolidated plan for the development and all of the associated public benefits?
Yeah, in a sense, yeah. A strategic plan is just something that, you know, with all the parties involved in the development would come together and have a discussion about what are our goals, what are our metrics, what are we looking to do? Because the thing that tends to happen with projects like this is that, you know, everything gets talked about in the future, but it doesn't really get circled back to in 5-10 years, and the things just kind of fall off, and that's where strategic planning could be helpful. And I was just curious if that's something that is part of the process, or if it's planning to be, or if it's not, the way that the developers or others are approaching that.
You know, regarding sort of the public benefits that we see being a part of the development and being continued as in part of the development, those are those have been included in the planning commission documents and the PUD documents that we've provided. We didn't go so far as to lay out a true plan or a true strategic plan.
Right, which would make sense because it hasn't been approved yet. I was just curious.
Right.
So you said PUD,
The PUD is what you
The plan-
received for this meeting.
oh, right. Oh, yeah. So
Planned
that,
unit development. Yeah, it is that actually. Joseph.
oh, okay. I
Yeah,
thought
that
it was
is
just,
it. Yes.
so, yeah, because this doesn't really, okay. So I think all I'm getting at here is that I'd like to see, as we discuss these amenities and things like that, if there is a plan for long, like, how are we gonna develop long-term metrics to make sure that, you know, kind of milestones, see, are we meeting the goal of having a bathroom in the park? What are our goals? You know, what's the point of having a bathroom if it becomes defunct after 10 years, like some of the bathrooms in, was it Riverside, Frog Island?
Oh,
Yeah, so just kind of like, you know, things that sound great. What, you know, are there going to be long-term metrics and planning around what the goals are for them?
that's our job.
Okay,
We're supposed to incorporate that. in.
okay, all right, that makes.
Yeah, I think that's the purpose of this agreement that we're working
Okay.
on. Yep.
I would say that would be part of, like, as we think about them, to think about the accountability for them. And that's gonna be part of also, I think, getting a sense of what things like are reasonable within this agreement, et cetera, right?
Okay, great.
So maybe if we could, how about we go through, and I just want to get a sense of where folks are in terms, just like, you know, whether things that are like lift up or and things like that. And so if we can go through this, then I think we can figure out where we need to have further conversation. So that first section, like one thing I'll name is, for instance, like the bus stop and covered shelter. That's already something that's part of the plan, public benefits that we talked about last week. So like, that's something I just marked as like, that's already part of the plan. That was something that was also named. So yeah, so what kind of things within that first section, like jump out for you all? And also if there's something that wasn't on there that, you know, is jumping to your mind and heart now. Yeah, let's do.
So the first item on there, somebody proposed that at the meeting at the Freight House, and that is on the goals for the city. Several the bathrooms and parks, right? And so that's been the goal for a number of council members when they submit their goals. That's something that is being looked into. But the Parks and Rec committee did a survey of this and got an estimate on how much that would cost a few years ago. And my understanding, and Joe helped me out here, is that is gonna Ron Akers is gonna have to go through that again and figure out what the cost associated with that is. So if we think about that, that's already a goal for the city. And I'm not, if that would just be a cash payment if you're considering that for files development, but we need to have costs associated with that before, consider that. I'm not sure that's within the time frame of this committee's life. So my guess is that survey won't be ready until sometime summer.
The cost to do all the park bathrooms was $750,000 4 years ago. And the it's also a lot of the update maintenance of that, but to go with what Alyssa had said, which is the city's not going to maintain it. We shouldn't spend $750,000 to shut them down again. But one thing that other communities have done in community benefits ordinances request the city put language into their ordinance on what the city will do as part of these developments. And so that is something that you also might want to look at and consider. If you look at any of the Detroit ones, it's the city will do this, the city will do that, the developer will do this, the developer will do that. And so you could potentially, and I might be speaking out of turn, Steve, I'm just going off of what other CBOs have done, is this committee can actually request the city do things as part of this development.
Thanks, Joe. That is helpful to think about, and it's good to have that cost too. And I also think that it's possible as we think about things, just again, it's just like what possibilities is that, like for instance, with the bathroom in the park, it doesn't have to be all the bathrooms. It could be one, right? Like just to say, like, I think that, it doesn't have to be like all or nothing, but it's helpful to think about that. And I have seen that those are goals for some city council members, and and I think it is possible to think about like how we can encourage that too.
And then the accountability, sorry.
Okay.
And then the accountability, so then basically like the city gets a payment to do it, and then the accountability actually rests with the city and us to follow up on like, is it happening? And so would that be like where the accountability rests and something like that?
So we're in uncharted territory.
Okay.
So like, yeah, we can request anything. I mean, within reason. And then like Kyle will also bring up, Michigan funding will only allow so much to be covered out of their funding.
Yeah.
And so making a park bathroom in a park that doesn't touch this, like the Michigan bonds that they are receiving for this development cannot pay for that. And so how do we make the developer pay for that? That's a whole nother discussion that you all need to have with Kyle. Because the Michigan funding, you can pay for a lot of the on-site and direct off-site improvements, but and I mean, and if you just say, I don't care about that, which is fine, but then Kyle has to look at that as the development to go forward.
Okay. I know, Alice, no.
Yeah, I think I am less interested in stuff that is pretty like surface level stuff. Like I think that there are things on here that would be great if they can happen, but I don't think should be like come at the expense of like some of the stuff that feels more important, like multi-family recycling, like planting trees outside, stuff, rain gardens are great things. It also is gonna prevent like an insulation program from happening, or like I don't like more affordable house, like actually like changing the way that the rents are calculated. If that prevents that from happening, I think, yeah, those don't feel as exciting to me because they don't feel like they're gonna help as many people.
I definitely agree. I feel like discussing the AMI, discussing what management company is going to be installed, I guess is the word, as well as giving residents empowerment in discussions about the community. So I think those are my main concerns.
So I think like, again, like I think that that's part of that balance. And so we might be able to get through some areas quicker than others. And so it sounds like, like in this first section, I know for me, like I was like pedestrian, like I want to go to the site too and do kind of like what Lisa has got like did too. But like, I just want to lift up one thing that I would definitely want to look at and think about, whether it's adjacent to this site or at another site where we have a big need for a pedestrian crossing that's like really visible, like the one that it's easy to fix, like the one that's right here on Michigan Ave going into Riverside, like where you push the button and it stops. Like, just thinking about things like that, or different, there's different ones for different kind of spots, but I don't know yet if that's going to be like a top priority. I just want to name that like within that section, that is probably the one that would be definitely a priority because I know it's so hard to do. And if you can kind of do it as part of, you're already kind of doing something, then maybe it'll be good. So I just want to name that one.
Second that, definitely second pedestrian crossing.
Mhm. But if we don't have anything else in that first section that we want to kind of talk about, then we can move on to the next section and start to like, you know, and kind of pull those out and then we can just go back to the ones that like really lift up to the top, you know?
I have, I'm interested in including in our thinking about this, the like community access to the river, boardwalk along the river sort of talk. I don't know, and Kyle, maybe you can speak more to this at some point, how much like there was consultation with people with expertise on the local ecology and the hydrology of this part of the Huron River. So I would like to, I think that might be a community benefit that I would like to see included in this would be really like investing in getting that expertise in this development plan and seeing what they say about that. So if that ended up being like a terrible idea detrimentally, then I wouldn't like it. But a benefit that I see there is that then the community can go there and see what this development is doing to the river. I think that that's often, you know, you'll find like out of sight, out of mind kind of places in our built environment where we shove the retention pond and we shove the erosion like, you know, over the verge and you never see it. And you know, I could possibly see there being more of an incentive for that to be an area that's maintained if it's something that the community had access to. That would be, of course, if that access weren't itself prohibitively detrimental.
Kyle, you all look at that? Oh.
So I can speak to that a little bit. Tegwin, if you're talking about community access actually to the river itself, in this area, the slope to get down to or near the river, it's incredibly steep. When we first started looking at this development, I thought that the idea of somehow engaging the river, either for our residents or the broader community, was kind of a neat idea. And then when I got there and really started looking at it and thinking about it, I don't know that there's a safe way to do that to get people down to the river. It's just really steep. We don't want our residents to, from a safety standpoint. I mean, we just don't think it's safe. That doesn't mean that everything that you just suggested, couldn't happen in another way. But I think if it's about engaging with the actual river, I would advise, and you're welcome to go and look for yourselves, but I would advise that it's pretty treacherous over there. And I would actually want to keep as many members of the public and our own community a safe distance from the river there.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, we're 27 feet above the river at our property. They're a little bit less, I want to say maybe 23 feet. Obviously you could put a staircase down, but it would stretch quite a ways back. And it would be almost 3 stories or 2.5 stories.
It's incredibly, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Lisa?
There's also existing parks. When I drove back there today too, I saw 2 different locations that I had never seen because I've never gone back there that are sort of like up tier parks to Peninsular Park.
Okay.
That could use like major TLC. And I don't know what that means in terms of working with the existing developments, but there's certainly that's already there. So I think it is a realistic thing to say that area in particular could be tended to.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, sorry, yeah.
That's right. So along with this, there's the project in removing the dam. And when that dam comes out and the water, then there will be more land in Peninsula Park and more land at the bottom of the slope. And so the idea of having one thing that we could do in that regard to show this is to have what we've done is basically told the people on the comment that we weren't going to make a park through private property that is exposed. So that's already in place. These folks weren't around when that happened, but one thing we could put in this is to maybe leave that as a unique site. And so extend a boardwalk up from Peninsula Park, but then that would have to incorporate the apartment complexes that are there as their land is exposed. And so having a boardwalk on the bottom so they could look up at it would be one thing. But having the stairway is pretty steep. So, but since we don't have that,
So this
that
is,
project isn't.
this is imagining like a boardwalk along, kind of like they have in Dexter, where they've taken out the dam and they have a boardwalk through the.
Right.
Cool, that would be cool.
But it would be an exception to the statement that we've already made to the other homeowners that we're not going to do that along their property. That we would have to, if we're going to do that, to extend it up from Dunn Park, then we would have to have an agreement with the other apartment complex that's on between Dunn Park and this site.
That they could use that stairway.
It's their land. It would, the park. would
It's their
all
land, so
run
you
through,
would-
like,
would
if
have
they
to
were
have a-
interconnected, it would be somebody's personal, like, private property.
I could draw a picture of it.
Yeah.
So,
No, but that's helpful, because I mean, I think, and that's the kind of thing, again, to what Alyssa was saying in terms of, like, that would be a benefit that's not like, right today, they could do it. But it would be something that would be like, okay, this would be a staggered, once it's possible, that we would be looking for something like that.
and just put a clause in to keep that open as possible.
All right, so I'm just marking that because it kind of responds to something that you were talking about, Teglin, in terms of like thinking about access and different things. And so, if there's nothing else, I'd like to move to the next section. All right, I'm just reading this mainly for, yes, Mr. Bragg.
So on that point, I think the specific legal thing, with regards to the exposed lands and the possibility of some public dedication, I think that we'd be looking for an easement. That if that's what the committee desires and the developers in agreement, we can't solve the other properties at all, but this property would agree as part of this agreement to an easement that when or if lands are exposed, that those will be available and for use for the public.
Great, thank you. So like that's what we could say for this particular, would then open up, and I think that would be right, where it could be like, okay, this could be this easement, and then we would be looking to the city to also continue those other negotiations and, you know, with the hope of developing X, Y, and Z, right? So that would be kind of like a little bit of a hybrid kind of request, right? So, thanks for that. All right, if we, I'm reading the section mainly for this like public and stuff, so so the second area was around incorporation of green or sustainable energy elements into the project or the promotion of such investment throughout the city of Ypsilanti. So just wanted to see what things people lifted up. So I know Alice, you already talked about the recycling for multifamily within that, so and other things. So anyway, just wanted to see what folks kind of would prioritize within this section or any other questions or things specifically for that.
To be clarify, sorry, I was less interested in that if it comes at the cost of something else.
I
I think, like, I mean, all of these things are great, yeah, we can do them, but something that jumped out to me as feeling exciting was the insulation program. I was actually curious what that meant. Was that like a winterizing house kind of a thing, or what is
I was curious too. I don't remember who suggested.
I don't remember who suggested it either. I know that this development will have to be built with current specifications in mind, so it will be very winterized. I know the county does have weatherization programs. So I don't know if it's part of that. Those are typically funded by CDBG.
Who was that?
Community Development Block Grant.
Sorry, I use way too many acronyms. Thank you. That's all right.
And the water retention pumps that are in there, are those the things that are under your parking lot already, or is that or going to be under the parking lot, or is that something else, Kyle?
I don't know what a
Alright.
water retention
Never
pump
mind,
is.
sorry, I just
Yeah.
realized that it says Water Resource Commission, so you did not.
Yeah, it was,
Does
I
anyone
wondered
know
what that was too, retention house.
So would you say that the planned retention ponds and the permeable concrete and all those other things would kind of, you know, basically be covered by section 2 here? Some of the things
I
that
think that you, yeah, they're already in the plan and that
Yeah.
already.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the questions, so I want to come back to something else, but for this, in this place, I think last time we were asking Kyle if we would talk to the engineers around like what they were using for determining those,
Yeah.
the
Oh, yeah.
water.
Supplements, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if you got any information about that, since we're kind of talking about that kind of.
I did, yeah. I actually have had several conversations with a civil engineer. And the answer, as is often the case with engineers, is more complicated than like probably needs to be. But to try to kind of boil it down, the way that the stormwater retention on the site, which just broadly speaking is like how we're holding and retaining temporarily stormwater on the site and then releasing it at a controlled rate so that it's not running off at too fast of a rate. How we're managing stormwater retention is directly tied to the Washtenaw County Water Resource Commission standards, which I've learned over the last couple of weeks are some of the most stringent in the country. They're not just the state, but in the entire country. And so I think that it's good for people to understand that as a baseline, that's who the commission is that's determining how this needs to be done. And so I think that's a real positive.
Thank you, that's really great.
Yeah, so just know that, and that applies to every development that comes through this city. So I wish I could say that that's like a great pat on the back, unique thing for us. It's a pat on the back, unique thing for the county. And then we are incorporating multiple different facets, like we talked about last week, in order to accomplish what we need to. But there was a discussion about so what is the baseline, right? Is it the 100-year flood event, rain event? Is it the 25-year rain event, whatever? And what I've learned is the baseline that the county uses, which again is what this development will need to use, and what is again one of the most restrictive in the country, is the 100-year flood or 100-year rainfall, excuse me. I don't know if those two terms are the same, but the 100-year rainfall event. But then they have done some adjusting, taking into account the fact that that benchmark keeps moving. What I don't know is how recently it moved. But it's not like it's the 100-year storm today, as you know, isn't the same as a 100-year storm 100 years ago. And the Washtenaw County Water Resources Commission knows that. But when I talked to our civil engineer and I said, can you break down the calculation for me? They said, we work with Washtenaw County. They have the scientists on staff that say, here is how we need to size this system. And the baseline again is this 100-year storm that then has been adjusted. Further, then I said, well, there's concern from this committee that I'm meeting with that we may want to look at doing something that's more robust or that retains more stormwater for longer. And they said that they had a couple of different comments that I thought were interesting that I wouldn't have anticipated. One, they said, anytime you go with like a large engineering body, if you will, like a Water Resources Commission, and you try to push them outside of their science and their standards, nobody knows how to work within that. And so you open up just the process to something entirely new that people haven't studied, and they don't have the science to say, well, we should do X% more or something like that. But then further, because we're adjacent to the river, and because we're very far downstream from the water, there's a lot of water coming from much further north, like up in Oakland County coming down. And with stormwater retention, one of the biggest risks is not what happens the minute it rains, but it's the downstream effects from everything else that happened over the next hours and days. So it's actually to retain a bunch of extra water on our site for longer could have detrimental impacts to the river because you have more water coming downstream over a longer term. So one of the big goals when you're adjacent to a river in our spot is to retain the appropriate amount, but get it through the system quickly enough that that's not causing additional sort of backlog for everything else coming downstream. I didn't know any of that 2 weeks ago, and maybe that didn't make any sense, but
No, that sounds great.
Yeah.
I learned all of that in talking with these engineers. And so it became, I thought of it as a real one-dimensional sort of issue. And I think it's broader. It's much more complicated than that, but that's what I learned for what it's
Do
worth.
they have any ideas in terms of materials that help you address that? I know there's not a magic fix, but is there something that does that, beyond the materials that you guys are already planning on using?
Well,
Maybe that's,
so one of the things that they were saying was the fact that we have, so we sort of, I wish I could find my notes from this conversation, because I think I can. Give me 1 second. Because we're essentially addressing it in multiple sort of multiple facets. So we have this underground tank that I mentioned. So we're sort of addressing this stormwater in stages. So we have an underground tank, and it's open at the bottom. So it's essentially a concrete structure, but it has gravel and other materials that allow water to percolate from multiple different directions. So it collects water from surrounding soils, and then it controls the rate at which so it allows that water to filter in. It controls the rate at which that's released. That is kind of step one. Step two is for water that doesn't get captured there, or that ends up flowing out of there. Then it goes into the infiltration ponds that we talked about. We've got those 2 ponds on kind of the river side, the southwestern side of the site. And then that's retained, and then ultimately it moves into the river. So they've done the 3 different stages in an attempt to it's a multi-tiered way of addressing it, as opposed to just saying we're going to stick a pond on the corner of the site and make it big, and that'll capture everything. But also
yeah,
the
they're kind of trying to mimic
impervious
the
pavement.
natural, how it would actually go through.
Sorry,
It sounds like they're trying to mimic how it would actually go through a.
That's right.
What it
There's
is
a
now.
component to quality. There's a component to quality of the stormwater as well. Stormwater that's filtered through more processes like that, becomes of a better quality when it's released into the river, as opposed to stormwater that does not go through those multiple stages.
I'm still interested in like visually seeing like if we, not from a point of critique, but just out of sheer curiosity, because it's all very interesting and exciting. If the engineers are willing, if they have any documents that we can kind of look at all, or if it's just all their knowledge that they kind of contain in here and are added to it, or if they have like a, you know what I'm saying? Does it make sense?
So I think I can probably step in. Washington County has I think 250-page document on how these things work.
Yep.
We could.
I think
share
it's
that-
570, Joe, because I just
Sorry,
found
I know
it.
the city's engineering standards are 200. I apologize.
No,
And so it's all going to be in that, and it's not an easy document to do. We could take some of our staff time and try to figure it out. And we can also ask the Water Resources Commissioner to actually come to one of our meetings to help explain it, because I do think it's important. And from what I've gathered from every single person sitting on this table, is the greenness of this, and to make sure that we don't have floods is super important.
Yeah.
I'm just looking around, I feel like that's a very important thing. And so I don't mind asking the Water Resources Commission. I don't know if Kyle, they can have his engineers come to a meeting. They might be able to help as well, trying to get the experts. We also have Steve, who's my expert.
Yeah, I was thinking that same thing, Joe. If we wanted to try to get the commissioner could be helpful, I'd be happy to see if we have a couple, like a team of civil engineers on this. So see if one of them could join, or if they could both join. I'd be happy to talk to them.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
I just want to bring up that it's 8 o'clock right now, and this is an awesome conversation. And also there's a ton of information out there and a ton of work that's been done in our community about ways in which to manage stormwater well. And I'm interested in talking more about some of these other more unique possible community benefits.
Sure, so we want, yeah, I just want to say, so one of the things in this area, so I know you said you weren't as interested in this, but I'm just like, again, naming, things that I might want to come back to as we think about the balance is recycling for multifamily, both at this site and maybe even some of the adjacent properties in that area, at least in terms of piloting the program, because I know this is just a big thing, like it's like a big overcome for the city to be able to do. And I know that they're expanding the recycling program to include some more larger multifamily. Right now it's like 4, I think, and I think that they're expanding it a little bit to try it out. And so I'm just like, we don't have to talk about it that much, but I just wanted to name that I'd be interested in coming back to seeing what that would look like for this site to help to pilot it with a larger development. And because that's gonna also have cost to it that we'll have to figure, that will have to be determined at some point. So I just want to like name that one and then we can move on.
Can I say- Yeah, I'll go after Steve. I have one more in that section.
I look at solar and I think that that's good. I don't know that Kyle does that. One of the things about something that somebody brought up is having to be all electric instead of having gas appliances. And I don't know if you could address that, Kyle, so instead of having gas lines running into this where you have potential for carbon monoxide and explosions and things like that, is this going to be strictly electrical appliances?
So typically we would have both gas and electric. That said, I am actually a little bit early in the process, but I've been starting to work with the mechanical team and figure out if it needs to be gas and electric or if we can do all electric. And so I guess I would say that's kind of being developed right now. Typically we would have a combination. Historically, heating is less expensive to heat buildings with gas than electricity. Water heat is the same way. And in these developments where your operating costs are important to keep as moderate as possible, I can't say as low because nothing is low cost, but as moderate as possible, the gas has been something we've done. And the appliances that use gas for those are so much more commonplace and available, and again, less high cost.
Can I just say, wait before you talk about, because this on the stove thing, I just want to say, I know when we were doing work and looking at housing accessibility, and especially for seniors too, there was a lot of conversation about like stoves and like cleaning and things like that. So I would also lift up that like electric stove and things might be more accessible, specifically also for the senior population, because that came up and the work of our subcommittee when we were looking at that, which was something that it was like a totally different kind of accessibility piece that I had not considered, but they were bringing up like stoves and like things like that. So
I just feel like I have, and something important to say, if you're gonna have electrical appliances and things like that, there needs to be some sort of dedicated way to deal with power outages, because what happens is
All these buildings,
Oh.
all the buildings have backup. They should have backup generators.
Right, because I just like, I don't want there to be over dependency on electric and then we get a power outage during the winter and we have no way of keeping people warm. So, that's kind of a major concern for me, and I could see a long-term plan to have maybe a mixed incorporation of electric and gas. And then as electric and renewable power becomes more reliable, kind of phasing that out. So that's just something that comes to mind for me, because my major concern is that, there is going to be loss of power, and you need to make sure people are kept warm and safe. And electric is not always totally reliable, so that's just my concern.
And if I could speak to the solar too, I just want to second that and the recycling for multifamily, but this solar, and I know this is again it also involves a question of long-term maintenance, but things like charging stations at the bus stop with a shelter. So if the bus stop has a large trash receptacle with a top, like a full service kind of bus stop, and maybe there's charging solar panels for things like maybe small solar panel projects. I mean, it would be amazing if all the roofs were filled with solar and that could be maintained, but I know that is probably its own kind of nightmare. I don't know, but smaller solar projects around that give people access to free energy would be great. That's one thing that and I've also, Steve, I don't know if you have experience, but I would be curious to hear if anybody else has experience with those very small kind of microgrid solar projects that have been kind of successful.
I don't.
Okay.
There's lots of small. things along the highway. things like that. Certainly bus stops.
I know Highland Park has had to sort of figure out their own solar, but it's also been up and down with being able to maintain it. I can look into that in between now and our next meeting though. If other people are interested in something like that specific to solar.
Yeah, it would be great. I think like whatever we can bring in to think about, that we will have a fuller picture. So I think that would be helpful.
I can talk with Dave Strensky.
That would be awesome, and you know, 'cause
Kyle, I'm sending you over Dave Strensky's contact information right now. He's Solar IPSI, which is not a nonprofit, but he's just a guy who loves solar in the city, and he's put solar on so many roofs. I don't think we even know how many. He's also put them on all of our city facilities, and he's figured out a way to monetize the installation, and it would suit this project very well.
Great.
Thanks,
thank
Joe.
you. Yeah, so let's come back, so we'll definitely come back to that. Under 3, we had brainstorming, but I know that folks want to get to some of the other things, so I'm gonna go ahead and skip over that unless anybody has something specific there.
That was just a placeholder.
Yeah, I know, it just is that we didn't have anything under there, so I'm saying like, I'm happy to go, then we have the other pieces, which I know, Ted, when you were kind of starting to talk about things like accountability for landlords and the tenant union. And some of these, so do we want to kind of talk about which of these things under other that we would want to lift up and prioritize to come back to, or
Yeah, I'm good with, I would like to come back to number 3 this evening possibly, but I have more immediate things to say about sort of some things in the other category.
Number 3, as in.
Number 3 being the unbundling of construction work into bid sizes that will allow local business level
It's
competition.
under the insulation program.
Yes, that's the third sort of thing.
Yeah, I know, it's just that you could skip over it, so I'm like, I didn't know if you were talking about unbundling or if you were talking
Oh,
about
just the whole,
creation of financial sort of.
Oh, there's.
I'm interested in moving on to the bullet points listed under the other.
okay, yeah.
These two there. And I know we had some really great conversation last week about accountability for landlords and property management firms, as well as resident governance, which I definitely want to talk more about, but also we've been talking about this development in relation to the neighbors there. And just like looking at this development in context there on the north side of the river, north of Peninsula Park. I would love to see more conversation about the possibility of including some like publicly accessible indoor space in this development, such as a public grocery store or a small more sort of food mart, or a space that could be operated by another organization, as a city or nonprofit, as a community space that might provide programming for residents. Because looking at this development moving in here, there's not really anything in this area for the residents who live in the space to walk to do anything. Like right across the river there's like the empty wooden nickel restaurant and like one BP gas station. McDonald's is gone. There's nothing at all on the north side of the river, and there's hardly anything on the south side of the river there, which doesn't make sense to me because there's all these people, and there's going to be way more people now if we put this development in. And if I was going to live there, I would like to be able to, on like a nice sunny spring day, walk from my house somewhere and check out a book from the library or get a cup of coffee or something like that. Yeah, I think that would be like a huge benefit.
I want one of,
this is probably getting ahead of ourselves, but you made me think about like a market that sets up there, like this is different than what you were saying, but is there any way of working with Growing Hope and asking them to do like a monthly or twice a month market?
A little farmers market?
Yeah, something that just in the, but I agree with
Yeah,
you.
there's so many sorts of like directions in which a space like that could go in. It could be something there, a space where you could have knitting groups, every Thursday afternoon, and then dance, kids dance classes on Wednesdays or whatever. I mean, there's just like a lot of things that people need to do.
Can I try
One of
and,
the,
you had been waiting, Des.
well, I was just gonna say, to this point, like, this was actually something that I wrote down, under a different section that's coming up, but I feel like it kind of relates to what you're talking about, which I had, something for like on-site, like tutoring and activities for children. I know within a lot of different housing complexes, like, especially if it's gonna be affordable housing for folks with families, that's something that people look for in general. And I wonder, if there's a space where that kind of thing can happen, whether that could also be kind of a space that other kind of enriched activities for other folks can happen too, like, as you're talking about that. So I feel like that could be kind of connected because, and that also goes into the kind of resources that project management would bring into the building and space. Because some project management companies, especially for low income housing, don't want those kinds of things. So being able to kind of put that in and talk about that, I think.
I will say somebody who lives directly adjacent to the development, like Eastern is right there, and I know that the relationship between EMU and Ypsilanti has been historically tenuous. I haven't seen anything mentioned about reaching out to them because they take up such a huge portion of it, and there is a lot of students who go there who live off campus, and I feel like there's potential for partnership there, but I've not heard it being explored unless I missed something. And people tend to have this idea that Eastern and its students don't want anything to do with the community, and in my experience, that has been completely untrue, that when you bring ideas, they actually have a department within it, because when I previously worked for a nonprofit, we reached out to them, it's like, can you help us do some planning around this or that? And they were super excited to do so. So I would be interested in having more conversations about how Eastern might be able to collaborate and share some of these spaces. And the same thing with WCC has the Harriet Center right there as well.
Are you mentioning Eastern being an entity that could help provide and manage services that would be offered within a space like this?
I'm not sure if I would say they could provide and manage it, so much as there could be opportunities for a greater conversation, just because Eastern has its own problems with eventually privatizing things out. But I'm just saying, I haven't seen them mentioned yet, so I was curious to see if that has been discussed at all, and I just missed it. I'm trying to keep the point consolidated so that we can continue the conversation, but I just want to throw it out there that I haven't seen it mentioned yet.
I mean,
Can I?
go ahead.
I just wanted to ask if I could add I think that there are some really interesting comments here, sort of broadly about partnerships with various community organizations, like what could we do to potentially provide some space for community organizations to come and kind of use the facilities, help residents, potentially help others in the community. And then Eastern Michigan being one of the potential partnerships. I have connected with them, and I've kind of gotten moved around to a couple different people. And actually next week I have a conversation with somebody about, if I finally think I got the right person, about who we can potentially talk to about some sort of a partnership or what, what we might be able to do together. And so I can, by the next time we meet, I can certainly report on that conversation and what we're talking about and kind of bring you guys into that.
Yeah, the current MP is going to be interested to hear about that, who you're talking to as well. Lisa?
Go ahead, Alice was waiting too.
sorry,
I can
somebody
go,
else.
Alice is on stack and I can go after
Right,
her.
Alyssa, did you want to say something? Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna wonder if Kyle could also respond to the idea of whether there's already a plan for like a space that could be like a space that's.
Yeah, it's on the list for each development as a community space, and so you can.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking about like that seems like it's probably an internal community space. So I'm just saying, like, if there seems like there's a space that would be able to be something that could be more open and or in terms of thinking about yeah, so we're talking about partnerships and things that could happen in there, so we can come back to that in a later point. But if there seems to be a space that could fit under something that would have more community connection.
Are you thinking more like a standalone business that occupies a space, or it would be more of, I heard like classroom and tutoring mentioned, for example. Is it space that would be set aside for something like that, or more of like a standalone business?
Yeah, more like the former.
More of
Like
like,
a community, like something that like the wider community might be able to access for support, you know, so like if there were tutoring or mentoring in that space, and there were other residents, right, who were in that area, that they might be able to also be connected to those
So
services.
I'm going to make a couple notes about this and talk with our management people, because so typically it's common to do partnerships with local organizations within the community space and within the apartment community. Opening it up to outside community, I just want to talk with them about that, understand the sort of the dynamics of that, and if that's something that they have experience with. I personally am not opposed to it, but I want to maybe learn a little bit more about that and talk with you guys about that next time.
That would certainly broaden your scope of what the kind of facilities that you would be owning. Do you have a thought one way or another about having a standalone business in there? If there was like, I'm imagining like a market where people could go and buy milk and eggs. You know, there are plenty of examples in my experience of stuff like that, more so in like, imagining like Huron Towers. I don't know if you've ever been there in Ann Arbor. It's an apartment complex that has a couple of stores on the ground floor, and then this like tiny little market that's like tucked in the middle there. We can, you know, buy ice cream and canned beans, which I like.
What we develop, we don't develop mixed use. So in other words, housing and retail businesses. I have in former times, I have done some work like that, and I can just tell you that it's incredibly difficult to fill those spaces, and it makes development projects like this really difficult to finance, and so we don't. Now, if there were an I mean, I'm trying to think about how we could potentially do something. I didn't know, typically we don't. And so I would be much more, I think it'd be much more feasible to figure out a way to partner with some organizations to use some of the community space than to build standalone space.
Is there a possibility for expanding the square footage of the community space that you've included in your preliminary plans? Or could you tell us right now how much space you have in these plans set aside for this purpose?
I don't know off the top of my head how much square footage we have specifically for like office type space that could be used as flex space. I'd have to look at that. We could possibly look at expanding, but again, I think I would really be interested first in what types of organizations might this committee, you know, want me to partner with, and can we satisfy their space needs with what we have currently? I think our club.
Yeah, so just going off of that, you mentioned that you can't do mixed use, so like probably not such a market, but what about like a food pantry or food distribution or something like that? Because there's a couple of other groups in the city that do that out of like churches and other places, which is great. And also not necessarily like in the most densely populated areas. People have to like go to the food pantry, it's the whole thing, or like the food pantry has to organize delivery, which is even more of a whole thing. I think just like having like a food location, maybe with some, I don't know. That was just something that came to mind.
I was just in addition to that, I was going to add, like, I just today met with somebody who's been running like a free store,
Yeah.
you know, and
Is it the Andy Long?
no,
There's a couple of free stores locally that have popped up, which is really cool.
yeah, I mean, I think it's great. So anyway, I was just gonna say, like, in addition to that, like, that could be something that could be in a space, you know, and could be like something, again, especially, you know, if there's like a resident, like tenants that are organizing that space too, they could actually help like upkeep it and things like that too. So then there's not the monetary exchange, but it also is providing for some of the different needs that people might have in the space too.
I've very much utilized free stores and food pantries in the area, and they're always needed and appreciated.
And they're always run out of like somebody's back room. It's really hard for them.
I just have one thing to say and one question, Kyle, for you. One thing that I'm interested in, maybe this fits in like the jobs sort of question, working with local businesses or something, but when you referenced 2 weeks ago that there would just be one full-time grounds person, to me, that's raises some real red flags, so that I would be interested in talking about additional compensation for labor in a long-term way, situated into the plan somehow. So whether that's, you know, a salary for 2 more people, I don't know if that's possible, but 1.5 people to me seems like a concern. And then my question for you is, if your grandma or grandpa was going to live in the senior part of it, what would you add that's not there? Or what would you make sure that was there for them?
So
and you can think about it and tell us later.
Yeah, well, now is probably an okay time. I did want to talk a little bit about the senior development because I think there are different sort of people think different things when they hear senior housing. And so there's a whole spectrum of senior housing that's available in the world. You've got independent living, you have assisted living, you've got memory care, and like true nursing. And so this will be an independent living senior community. So it doesn't provide the continuum of care up beyond that. That's a totally separate business. That's just not what we do. That's more of a medical business, and that's not what we do. So just to answer your question specifically, my grandparents wouldn't they would go to like a more of a nursing or a assisted living type of a place. But I do think that for the independent living demographic, this community will offer a lot. It has large community spaces with gathering. It has outdoor spaces with pickleball and a pool. And again, outdoor gathering spaces and some really nice amenities that I think will serve the demographic well. So I'm open to talking about all that, but that's how I would answer that.
One thing, just as a quick suggestion, an issue that I ran into in my previous line of employment is allowing caretakers to live with somebody that they're providing for has become tricky for leasers, where they'd be like, this is a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom unit. It's being leased to a specific person, and then the person wants, say, a family member or somebody who is being compensated by the state to come in and care for them. And then the management company becomes very adverse to that. So I just want to see that kind of incorporated at some point, discussion of how can we accommodate not only, the senior community and disabled community, but also their caretakers and their broader support networks that come around them, because then we see things like, somebody can't stay for longer than 48 hours or this or that, and making sure that that's being taken into consideration, to not say the developers need to, provide care, but make it as easy as possible for seniors and disabled individuals to have caretakers in proximity to them.
Would it be safe to say that like this is policies that protect residents receiving the care that they have from outside the?
Just making sure that there is accommodation for the physical presence of caretakers living and staying overnight often with the people that they're providing for, because the need for caretaking can come quickly and it can come and go. So, but it's in my previous line of work, we ran into that a lot, where management was throwing a fit about somebody coming and staying and providing care.
Interesting. Sure. Okay. I thought about that
know, I mean, I feel like I know I missed some of the conversation. I know I've seen like things like that where there's like spaces typically at more like assisted living spots or like nursing homes and things like that when people visit. I don't know what that would look like in an apartment, because that would be like not renting out like a number of units.
It's a really tricky gray area because you'll have somebody sign a lease, it might just be one person, and then at some point in the duration of their lease, they need a caretaker, and the caretaker needs to be there 24/7.
So you mean like within their apartment? So
Yes,
within their
yes, within their apartment.
Mhm.
And they won't allow an additional person to be added to the lease, or they'll say this person has a criminal background or this or that, even though they're being compensated by the state to be a caretaker for that person. And I just want to make sure those barriers are removed, because it was an issue that I saw repeatedly with other management companies where caretaker need to come in and they're like, okay, this caretaker can move in, but their credit score has to be appropriate or things like that. It's like, that shouldn't matter, because they're there to provide care for the individual. And if you're going to have a large senior population who often have disability and other needs, make sure that there's not barriers for their caretakers to stay overnight and take care of them when that becomes a necessity.
Kyle, have you ever come across anything like that? I mean, is this the first senior development? I assume you guys have more senior.
No,
development.
yeah, no, it's not our first by any means, and I'm not familiar with this issue. I mean, this to me sounds like, I mean, I can see, I can think of instances where, or can imagine instances where somebody has tried to modify a lease, and it's not, somebody can't live there because it's not in accordance to the lease. That of course makes sense. Specific to someone's caretaker not being allowed to be their caretaker, is that this? Are you saying that it's a live-in caretaker, and so because then they're modifying the lease, that person can't technically live there, or is it just their caretaker is not welcome? Because those are two different things.
I mean,
and to me,
I've seen both happen. But I think you would want to, I don't have the direct experience. I'm speaking as a third party to it. You might want to speak more with, disability and senior living groups to see what sort of barriers they run into, because this was something that I was resolving so much of what I was encountering. But sometimes it would be something like, well, we don't, the apartment's not large enough to accommodate 2 people, so we have to move you to a different unit, but we don't have those units becoming available for another year, so you can't have a caregiver there overnight until X amount of time. Or they'll be like, your caregiver can live here, but they need to pass a background check and they need to have, minimum credit score, so they can, even if they weren't even on the lease, they would try to enforce that. And it was just a really hostile environment for people who wanted to have a live-in caretaker.
Do you guys negotiate those policies with the management company? That makes me curious just about management company policies.
Yeah. So, well, what I was thinking was what you're bringing up, Alyssa, sounds like a property manager sort of,
Right.
I'll call it an issue. I'm not trying to pass the blame, but that's a property management function. So what I want to do as a follow-up to this is talk with like I've mentioned before, we don't have property management in-house, but we have asset management. They effectively manage the property management relationships from an owner standpoint. And they're really knowledgeable about a lot of this. And this sounds like kind of nuanced, but frankly, it seems like I would know more about this if it was an issue at properties. So I'd like to learn more about it. But I also think if it seems like if somebody's not on the lease, and they're a caretaker, that should be easy to manage. Lisa, what you're bringing up is, I think we can make sure we provide direction to allow for those types of relationships. I will say in affordable housing, if you try to modify the lease and you bring somebody in who doesn't income qualify, if they make too much, they can't be on a lease. So that could happen in affordable housing, but that would be an income qualification thing, not a size of unit or size of household. Right. So
sorry. I was just saying, it's not that I need this to be resolved or you to have an answer. I just want to see some sort of language and conversation around it in the future, so that it's not a barrier for these individuals to be, it's better to have a policy in place than it is to figure it out when the issue arises.
I think a good next step would be for me to still talk with our asset management group and get their take on this and see, what have they run into? And do they have any ideas on how to make this accessible for people who have caretakers if it otherwise wouldn't be, or if it would otherwise have some potential issues?
Great.
And
Does that
I
sound-
think too, oh. Yeah,
Sorry,
I was
go
just gonna say, like, I feel like this gives like another, kind of qualifier, I guess, as we think about like the benefits and like who will do what and like how we build in that accountability language, where there seems to be a couple of things that we would want, like that there's probably other conversations for the asset managers in terms of that relationship with the property management, since I think that there's some things that we've brought up before in terms of some of those concerns that we want to make sure to kind of mitigate within this. And so there might be a couple of other things like that where we might sit, want to say what, because it's like what the developer can kind of control, right? And so like within your purview with that relationship, that there might be some things where we want to talk about, because I think that that's the same thing with like a tenants union and things like that. That support, like I would say, like that probably would be part of that conversation with the asset management team in terms of these are things that we want to be part of that conversation in that relationship with the property managers.
Just as a potential resource for you, Kyle, there is the Ann Arbor Center for Independent Living, that has been extremely helpful in the past with people who have needed caregivers and how to navigate that. So there's certainly somebody that could, might be someone you might be able to speak with.
Can you say that again?
The Ann Arbor Center for Independent Living
Mhm.
has, that's their whole thing is helping people live independently with disabilities.
Okay. Thanks.
Great.
And
Everybody
Desiree,
go on to the next- I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, I agree about the kind of like the resident, committee dynamic. I did talk with our asset management group about that, and so at some point tonight we should talk about that, because I have some thoughts after my conversations with them.
This is probably a good time.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So I talked with our the individual who runs our asset management group, and she had some really good ideas about the resident, I think she called it a resident community engagement committee or something like that. But the idea was there's a committee formed of X number of residents and the property manager and somebody from the asset management team. So you have, the ownership group is the asset management team, property manager is the manager on site, and then a number of residents, 5 or 10 or whatever, some number that act as kind of the body of residents, and that number is to be determined. That group, they oversee community-wide events, they oversee community-wide engagement and communication, and they meet regularly. In the examples that she shared with me, it was typically they would meet monthly. There are ways for them to interact more frequently if needed, if there are issues, but they have a monthly standing meeting, and that involves the asset manager and asset management individual, the property manager, and then the residents on the committee. And they review everything from upcoming things that residents need to know about. If there's an improvement project that's happening, they're doing repairs somewhere. And then the residents help with the dissemination of the information to the other residents. They also, of course, then like residents can raise concerns about my XYZ isn't working, something isn't being addressed properly, I have concerns about this, at those regular meetings as an opportunity for people to be heard and have accountability from the ownership team and the management team as well. And it's and everybody shares in that, so that it's not and it's recurring and it's regular. So it's not like just a one-off thing. It's not something where people don't know who to contact. You have these regular touch points with all three sort of pieces of that pyramid. And so that's, I think, has worked really well. And that was sort of her suggestion for a starting kind of how to, because I'm not sure like what a resident council would necessarily consist of, but I think a lot of what I heard was accountability and people making sure that resident concerns are heard and are addressed. And I think if you have regular communication and meeting among those different groups, that's a really good way to start.
I have a question. Well, I have two questions, actually. My first question is, can you give us a list of your current holdings that have a resident community engagement committee? And in those examples, how is the resident members of that committee selected?
I can get you a list. I don't have it, but I can get you a list.
That'd be great.
I'm just gonna make a quick note. Sorry.
No, thank you. I would love for you to write that down, and then.
I'm always writing a lot. And then my thought, but I'm open, and I can also find out from our head of asset management how it's been done in the past. My thought was that those members would be chosen by fellow residents. You know, there would be a formation of a committee, and people would have an opportunity to, you know, self-nominate, say, I want to serve on this. They'd have an opportunity to nominate somebody else, and there would be you know, some sort of a selection process. I don't want to use the word election, but sort of, you know, some sort of a selection or election process for those members.
I have a question on this to Mr. Barr, actually. So as we're thinking about these kinds of things, I guess my question is like, how much detail, you know, because I think that, like, for instance, on this committee, we can say, oh, here's some things that we think is like best practice for setting this up, or here's a process that we think would allow for fair representation or whatever else. But I'm just wondering in terms of how much of that kind of detail should we be thinking about that we can put into this here or not, if you have any thoughts on that.
Best thought I can offer is with regards to an agreement, part of what we need to look at is enforceability. And typically we need a good amount of detail to be able to determine whether it's an agreement like this or an ordinance or a law, you know, whether something violates it or not.
Mm-hmm.
So the more specific parameters that we, you know, can provide and how it is measured,
Mm-hmm.
the easier it will be to determine, you know,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's something that needs to be addressed or not.
Great.
Is that helpful or?
No, that's really helpful. Because I was just gonna suggest, like, Tegman, I know you have a lot of experience in this space, and so, I mean, anybody can think about it, but I was just thinking, like, if there are things that, you know, especially thinking about that selection, you know, that we can bring into the space that we can kind of think about would probably be really helpful, right? So just in terms of how to make that as specific as possible. Cool. So I'm just noticing time, so we have like 15 more minutes in our slot, and so I wanted to see if we are ready to, like, what it looks like to move into the next section, or if we're still in our other section, or if we move on to the next pieces, and then want to make sure we have enough time, so if we need to extend, we can do that. But before we extend, I want to kind of have a better sense of how long we would need to. That makes sense.
Where are we at technically?
So we were under the other, and I have a lot of really great notes under here
Oh,
of
I mean,
what we've talked about.
In terms of the front page, sorry.
Oh, we're still under B,
Oh, wow.
which is going through the community benefits. But I mean, some of the things are again like coming up as some of the things under C. But we're like in the last few of these, but some of them I think are like, you know, other ones that I know we're gonna there's some that I think we already have agreement that like we probably
Yeah.
would want to see, but I think we probably might want to talk about it a little bit more.
I feel like we're gonna have more information the next meeting that Joe and Kyle and other folks are gonna put together for us, so I wouldn't get too hung up on some of these points because we're gonna have even more information to consider next time.
Yeah, so I think the main thing would be kind of lifting up the questions or different things under them. And then my hope is that if we have a more targeted list that, based on what we're already naming as like priorities, then we can focus in on those, you know what I mean? So I think we're doing really, it is kind of getting a lot more clear, I think, some of the different pieces, so.
Yes, I think we should move to the next chunk.
Agreed, yes.
Okay.
And if we, I mean, depending on how long we decide to extend or not, it's acceptable to, like, if we can move some of these to the next agenda if we wanted to. Okay, so we could prioritize, like, it would, maybe we want to start with the AMI calculation and affordability, since we haven't really gotten there yet. That'll probably be a little bit of a longer conversation, and then.
Yeah, I'd like that to be prioritized in the next meeting if this does get moved forward.
Can I just make a note of something that I would like to be on the agenda for next meeting for all of us to start thinking about, which would be for members of this committee to begin brainstorming possible community partners that we would like to see in that sort of community flex space, and begin to think about what their needs might be and if we can think of something that would really serve the community.
Can I ask the attorney a question? And this is just me getting my bureaucratic.
Sure.
It's for me. We're very specific on the city that we don't recommend or require any specific organization. Only organizations of a type. And so is that the same here where we can't say you have to work with Growing Hope or Hope Clinic? Can we do that, or do we have to be more broad? Because I know for me, like if somebody comes to me and say, hey,
Like a food growing.
Yeah.
entity.
because I can't tell, if somebody comes to me and asks for a good contractor, I am not allowed to say, this person is a good contractor. This is a good reputable nonprofit, but we could say, here's a list of the people that are working in the city. Right, and so that's right, I just got my hackles up a little bit, and I don't mean to derail this, but I just get concerned about writing an actual organization. Because,
Yeah, well, I don't know that that's where my thought was at this point in the process, but I would like to know that if we would be able to do that at some point in this ordinance, or if it would be more of us exploring that relationship and, laying the groundwork, but we couldn't actually write it down that we want them to have a place for Hope Clinic or whatever.
And then I had asked Joe in the last meeting if we could have a list of involved entities, and I don't know if that materialized, like being kind of a breakdown of everybody involved.
I think that we are making that list.
Oh, we're making that? I mean, I want to know who is currently involved. Is what I had asked.
I think it's.
I dropped the ball,
That's
and so
okay.
it'll be in the next package.
Okay, thank you.
Joe, if you need any clarifications in that, the entities list, give me, shoot me an email. I can give you any missing information.
Yeah.
You want to answer Jill's question now?
Well, first, I want to clarify that I'm understanding the question correctly and taking it back to the scope of what the committee is doing. We're proposing an agreement between the developer and the city that then goes up to city council. And it is the question of whether that agreement should or should not specify partnerships with specific organizations. Is that the question?
Yes.
So I would concur with Joe's opinion that I think it would be, it is not normally in the city's purview to be benefiting specific organizations. It's the community as a whole. And so if if this group believes that it would serve the community in the whole to have X type of, whether, a lot of the topics that we have here already, that, that might be a space for, something that serves the community as a whole. That would be, I think that would be, would pass muster and not violate any statutes or ordinances. And furthermore, organizations come and go.
So,
Oh, I was just speaking, that was a question speaking to a point that Kyle had made, was the difficulty of filling spaces in these. And I know this wouldn't necessarily be like in exactly mixed use space, but
I mean, I think, so the way I'm understanding, I mean, I think we're not trying to turn this into a mixed use development, but in terms of thinking about, I think it might be good, even just for Kyle's benefit, because he doesn't know, right? Like the different groups and organizations in the space, in the area. So maybe, just in terms of for us in the next meeting to be able to talk about some of the what would be more specifics of what kinds of groups or kinds of services or things that would be good in there, and then we can maybe brainstorm some things that then Kyle can keep track, could get a sense of some of those, and then we can think about what they, what are the examples that we could add into it. So I think it's still good to kind of probably talk about a little bit.
It would also be important not to list any organization that any committee member is a part of, that'd be a conflict of interest.
Mhm. Yeah. So we could, again, it's thinking about the type. So I think that makes sense to do. And I'm just, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's time. Yeah.
Yeah, so with 8 minutes until 9, I think, and it sounds like we're gonna move on to the next pieces. But I would like to entertain a motion to extend. I don't know. You wanna try 15 and see where we go?
Yeah, let's try 15. And
You wanna make that motion, Alice?
Sure, yeah, I move to extend the meeting by 15 minutes to 9:15. I guess that'll be 20 minutes, yeah.
I second.
Great.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so let's go to this next piece. So is it sounding like we want to move directly to number 3 and talk about the things under there, or would folks under the next parts of 1 and 2 have things to say? I already mentioned the onsite tutoring and stuff, so I don't feel like I have to go back to that right now.
Wait, Des, I'm sorry, can you?
On the back page, on the last page of our agenda for today,
Oh, got it, okay.
I know that the numbers repeat again, so this is under the different tier, I think.
Oh,
Is
so
what,
it's 1, 2, 3, that's actually under C.
well, I think what it is that there, within the ordinance, that there are 2 tiers of benefits. And I think that there might be one of the tiers is the first is 1 to 3, and then I think there's then the next 1 to 3 is under a different tier. Is that correct, though? Does that make sense what I just said?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that's why the numbers are key.
Or 1 tier, the second tier, or another tier.
So we didn't even do the next 1, 2, and 3 on the back?
Yeah, so this
So we're
one,
starting now.
Oh,
so I'm saying if we want to, so if we have things in particular under these, or if we want to jump to the ones under number 3, which has some of the areas that I know we want to talk about.
I get it.
Thank you. Does that make sense? So we could go through them and see if there's anything, but if people are we don't have anything, we just jump to that last one.
My only existing question is, I guess I don't know if this is under number 1, but in terms of labor on site, labor force on site, is it realistic to ask that a benefit would be adding another position? Or is that something that's unrealistic and a distraction from our process? I don't know if.
Definitely not a distraction.
Okay.
I think it would be beneficial for the community for this property to be well maintained, absolutely, so.
And just as a quick aside, I'd like to see opportunities specifically for felons and other formerly incarcerated people. Job opportunities is very difficult.
I would agree, and also residents, residents.
So, and I know that's sort of I wonder about that, but because it's a projection over time of someone's salary, I guess that's what I was asking about, is that maybe I'm asking everybody, is that something that's can be, I don't know how you would calculate that over 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of the benefits that we're talking about right now, ideally would have ongoing maintenance and upkeep costs. And it would be less than how many millions of dollars. this project is taking. So I don't know if they have that information on top for him, but I think we can include that in the scope of what we're talking about. I think that's appropriate to include at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know, Kyle, do you want to talk about the thing about staff person? I do have a thought on it, but.
Well, one thing I was going to say was I can also talk more closely with I was speculating a little bit about, if it would be one full-time and one part-time, or kind of how it would be structured. I can speak more with our property management group and get a specific staffing breakdown, if that would be helpful. Because
I would be curious, yeah, just to clarify expectations.
yeah, why don't we start with that? I will talk with them about that. Like everything, when expenses start to go up, then something else has to give somewhere else. So that's where I'd like to I don't want to talk about the maintenance in a vacuum. Maybe we talk about all of the staffing and understand what that would look like. And then that may alleviate a concern, it may not, but that's probably the way to talk about it.
Okay. That's helpful.
That sounds great, yeah.
Great, thanks. So that's under the one. And then anything else under 2? All right, and then number 3, which is creation or financial support of either on-site or off-site mixed or low-income housing units.
I mean, that's this the thing that we were talking about. I think we're all excited about that. I guess to start us off, unless somebody else wants to go through anything, I have a question about like what the cost of that would be if we were to change the AMI to say reflect Ypsilanti's median income instead of the whole county's. Would that increase that gap that you discussed earlier between the amount that's being covered from the pilot and or the amount that's being covered from the tax credit and your loans versus the pilot? Like what is the cost of that? Like what would stop you from doing that, I guess?
So I'm not entirely sure that if we change to IPS, so for proxy for this conversation is the question, if we were to go do more units at like 40% of AMI, or 50% or 30, do you know, I know we've talked about some different rent levels, so it depends. But the short answer is the more affordable, or the deeper affordability that we apply to the unit mix that I've presented, the greater the pilot has to get, and it depends on what we're talking about changing. So I know that's not a real clear answer, but if you can help me understand what the ask is from the affordability side, I can try to put numbers to it.
Could somebody refresh me on what the current request is? The breakdown is right now?
It's 90% at 60% AMI and 10% at 40% AMI.
Say that one more time, Joseph.
90% at 60% AMI and 10% at 40% AMI.
Like 90% of the units are at 60% AMI?
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
And this, I was just gonna say, maybe this will be the way that we can get at it, because as opposed to thinking about using a different AMI metric, which I think overall would be something that I would like to see overall, right? Just like as a baseline, but maybe for this, as opposed to talking about a different metric, it could be thinking about the different AMI levels, right? And so that would be the way that we would get closer to thinking about what the IPSI AMI is. So figuring out what that percentage would be, and then being able to think about what that proportion might look like, or like being able to have some, just, like, just for us, as opposed to kind of be like, let's look at this metric, because I think at the last meeting, it's, around like the mission numbers, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to get lost in that if it's not gonna necessarily happen. But anyway, that's just, when you were saying that, that made me think, oh, maybe we could think about what that number would be, like, is it at 20% or whatever? And to say, can we have some, some units at this percentage? And I think at the last, if I am remembering too, I think this came up at one of the other meetings in that discussion of whether if the need, if there are units at lower AMI, that might be something that then the committee be like, yeah, you should extend the have a larger pilot in order, like that would be something that we could put forward, right? In terms of like having a lot bigger pilot in order to have more affordability. Is that right? Does anybody else remember that part of the conversation?
It could be in your recommendation.
Mhm.
I think in general, just for the sake of time, this is something I'm really concerned about. I think it has to require a lot of discussion. I don't know if I have a motion for this, but I would like this to be kind of at the top of what we discuss next week, so that we dedicate plenty of time to this issue.
I already had that in my notes.
Okay, great, thank you.
But I think it would be good if, like, I'm just like, we come in with some things, so if it's like understanding what the amount is, that would get us closer, like, that would probably be good for us to come in with. And probably a couple of other things, so that we can kind of bring some specific things to it, if that makes sense. Yeah.
If I could just say, over the next week, because our next meeting is in 2 weeks, if individually you could kind of reach out, email me a couple, just to not violate Open Meetings Act and not have you all discuss things. If you give me some of your ideas, I can get them to Kyle, and then he can actually run those calculations, because I think it's important to actually have, this is what you're requesting, this is the implication, and I think it's good to have the actual, the whole story, instead of having us tell them next meeting what it is, and then having them run those numbers for the following meeting. I think it would just be very helpful. So whoever wants to actually bring that to me, and I can get that with Kyle, or you can, I just think it's easier to have it compiled.
And yeah, can I just share, I think it sounds like we're going to dive deeper next meeting, but I prepared a little bit for this meeting. And there's no way I could sort of run every scenario. So I think, to Joe's point, I think it'd be really helpful to hear from this committee what you might be looking for. And then I can answer those questions more directly. But I did run a couple of different scenarios just for the benefit of this group, if it helps you all think about sort of how to approach this potentially. So we are requesting what's this 5% pilot. So that's 5% of what's called the shelter rent. It's effectively the rent collected by the property. 5% of that is paid in lieu of property taxes.
Can I just ask really
Excuse me?
quickly? Can I ask a really quick clarifying question? It should be, what would be the rate of property taxation typically on collected rent? Does anybody know that?
It's not on collected rent, so I don't know. It's not an apples to apples.
Gotcha. Okay. Never mind.
I don't know if somebody knows, can like back into it. I certainly don't know what it normally would be, because it's not calculated that way. Of course, it's confusing, but so a 5% pilot is what's being requested. If we were to increase, I used round numbers for the units because I think it's easier to think in round numbers. But if we were to say take 20 of the units that are currently at 60% AMI and put them at 50% AMI, the pilot would need to go from a 5% pilot to a 4% pilot in order for the loan to balance and for there not to be an incremental gap in financing. And then if you wanted to say those same 20 units needed to go to 40% AMI instead of 50, that's just like the next level down. And we are already providing 10% of our units at 40. Then that pilot would need to decreased to a 2% pilot instead of a 4% pilot for the 20 at 50. That it's a little bit hard to describe over this call, and I just ran those two quick scenarios to get an order of magnitude. But I thought that might be helpful for you all to have that information as you're thinking over the next week or so.
So how would that, just in terms of these, because we had like 10% at 40 as an example now, so if there were 20 more units at 40, what would that percentage, what would that lift the percentage to?
So 10% of the units is approximately 30. So 20 is 7-8% or whatever.
So it would lift, yeah, so it'll go from like 10% to about like 18.
Yeah. Correct.
That's with the pilot staying at 4 or going to 2?
That would be that 2%.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise it would be, the first scenario, the 4% was 10% at 40% of AMI, but then it would also have another 8-ish% at 50% of AMI.
Yeah, so this, I think that this will be good, and so folks can send Joe some thoughts, because I feel like I mean, I don't have the numbers ahead of me, and it's 9 o'clock, so I'm not gonna try to do math in my head, but I can think about like what those IPSI numbers look like and see like, so we can kind of see if we can pull some examples at that, what that would be.
And the CBOs that I reviewed, which once again, that doesn't really matter. What you end up seeing is like 2.5% at 30% AMI, 2.5%, like to get to 10%, but 30, 40, 50, or 20, 30, 40, 50, and just kind of do a smaller percentage of the lower AMIs to then actually get to the 10% at 40. That's what I've seen in other, and what they've done in Detroit, which is probably the most community benefits agreements per capita or per project in the country. And so that's where I go in just to do my research.
Great. Well, that's helpful. Thanks for running some of those numbers for us, because I think it helps to give a little bit of sense that we can get some more numbers and kind of think about what that looks like. So we're gonna come back to this at the top of our next meeting. Do we want to talk about any of these other ones under here as well? Do we see those as connected to that conversation that we'll have next meeting?
Definitely the 99-year affordability, like enforcement of this affordability.
Could someone speak a little bit more into that? Is that something that's currently in the plan, or that's something that would be a proposed community benefit? And is this something that exists in other types of housing that has community benefits?
There's a 30-year plan right now or something, that an existing plan, right?
Well, I think that, I mean, Kyle can answer this, but just to check for this clarity, the way I feel like I've heard this answered so far is that this development company is an affordable housing developer. And so the plan would be for it to remain affordable for the duration of their ownership.
That's right. But that's correct, Desiree. That the reason that the city is using 30 years when valuing the pilot and talking about the affordability is because that's the commitment that we make to MISTA, and that's what MISTA requires the affordability period to be as part of the tax credit program.
Which hasn't always been the case. Is why there
nothing. No, it used to be 15. It used to be 15 years. So what I was going to say was that doesn't. So the 30-year MISTA requirement does not preclude us from keeping it affordable longer than 30 years. And you're correct. We are an affordable housing developer, owner, and operator. So we don't have a business plan to come in and suddenly convert it to market rate in year 31. What I will say about the 30-year affordability versus say a 99-year affordability is that there are all kinds of different programs that are available, and that the low income housing tax credit program has been around for only 35 years. So there are new programs that can come out and sometimes can be beneficial for older housing stock that needs more investment. There are ways to do reinvestment through the low income housing tax credit program. But when thinking about the concept of a 99-year restriction, my concern would be that unintentionally we would be putting the development in a corner where we couldn't use the best possible program or resources down the road, which would be a different program that we don't know about yet, to better renovate, better repair, better repurpose development that needs that. I want to bring that up. I think that's 30 years is a really long time, and the property will look a lot different in 30 years, and it may need a program that doesn't exist.
Well, and just to add to that, the affordability will last the length of the pilot will last the length of the affordability. So if it's 50 years, it will end up being a 50-year pilot. But the second this goes out of affordability, the pilot's gone. Like that doesn't even question. So when Cross Village pulled theirs out of affordability, there was still a 3-year phase-in period when they did that, but they lost their pilot immediately. And so there is some benefit to the 30-year aspect because there is a typical age of buildings, but the pilot is only there as long as there is the affordability piece. Regardless if it's 50, if it's 100 years, the pilot will be there. If it's only there for 30, and there's other programs that will need to be negotiated at that time. So there also is just the time length, and I'm pretty sure Mr. Barr's firm won't be here in 30 years. You never know. I don't know if one of your children, Mr. Barr, wants to be an attorney, but there's also some institutional knowledge.
30 years. I would.
But so just as you're saying that, so when you're saying the pilot will exist as long as the affordability exists, so with them being an affordable housing developer, so then the expectation might be that they would not revert to like paying the city taxes in general during the time.
Yeah, they will just pay the percentage of pilot that's approved through ordinance and council.
And so then another question I have is whether there's, we're gonna have to figure this out. Yeah, so my question is whether there's a way that it would change. So it's like for 30 years at this pilot amount, and then after that at a different amount.
I don't know the answer. We'd have to actually do a little bit of investigating if there's a change after 30 years.
All right, so it is 9:14, which is at the time that we were going to stop. So just want to check for folks if you feel like you have anything that you want to talk about still, or whether we can go ahead and get ready to adjourn.
I think we've touched on a lot of the stuff from C. I would just like to ask that well, first of all, can we be emailing you guys between now and our next meeting to add stuff to the agenda?
Yeah, there needs to be a motion to extend or the meeting's over.
Yes.
Okay, then
Motion to extend 5 minutes.
Yes, the motion,
seconded.
second, Betty, motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
So, yes, what were you saying?
I was gonna ask about stuff being on the agenda next time, but.
Mhm. Yeah, we can go through,
Yeah.
now we have time to do.
You can email this to Andrew, myself, or Desiree, and between Andrew and Desiree, they set the agenda. And Andrew's taking notes from tonight. And I think after this discussion, I think Desiree said it very, very well, which is we've actually come to a point of where we want to be on this. And there's still a lot of questions, there's still a lot of things we don't know, but I think you all know where you want to go. And so I think the next discussion will be a lot more streamlined.
So yeah, were there specific things too that you wanted to pull from, because right now I have basically two things, well, the coming back to the affordability conversation at the top of the meeting, and then also talking about possible community partners for the flex space.
I would like to have some time, that could be not the top of the next meeting's agenda, talking about some of these like potential community benefits for hiring locally. I think that's worth giving some conversation to.
Yep.
And I would love, in the context of that conversation, if I could hear some experience from people in the city about how that's worked in the past, and ways you'd like to see it improved on, but I don't have a lot of expertise in that area, so I want to hear from you guys.
This is another question, Joe, you could bring to the next meeting, because I know I was in another meeting and talking about like the local contractors and folks that, like, the city probably has like a list of folks that go, you don't have a list.
Well, we have one at the county level. It's just, and we also know the contractors, the commercial contractors in the city, and there's very few. And
Yeah, so I was trying to get a sense of what those numbers look like, in terms of who's like what we have available within the city for this, but then also like when we talk about things like economic development and like what that means to grow, that, it'd be good to kind of have a baseline of who we have already.
Yeah.
Or how many, so that would be helpful for that.
Cool, and I would just like to add that I would like some information next meeting about unionized labor and what the overlap is there with people in the city and people who are represented at unions. I know that there's a lot of trade union stuff that happens at the University of Michigan, for example, but I don't know where those people live.
Great, thank you.
Do I motion to adjourn now? Is that what I do, or do I? or there's more things to discuss?
I just want to make sure like we have all the things for proposed business, if there's anything else from C, I think, some of these things we've covered, entities involved in development, so Joe's already said that, and Kyle, they'll work on that for the next meeting, and then,
Did I get to mention wanting a discussion of alternative management besides KMG? I think Kyle put that in consideration the last meeting. Alternates for KMG. Okay, well, Des is, I'm sure making note of that, so other than that, good.
all right, and that probably feels like a lot, I think, one of the things I'd like to do, like, so we can kind of complete through kind of talking about the benefits, and then if we have time, I would like to maybe have us start to do like maybe a prioritization conversation or exercise in some way, where we can maybe start to balance like, this we really want, this we kind of, like just to have a little bit of a sense of that so that we can,
Rank choice
a little bit, yeah, give some weight to, or like what we would weight heavy, whatever, so we can do that.
And maybe there's a process, maybe we can spend a few minutes just reestablishing criteria so that we're doing criteria-based decision. I know there's some ways to even do it like with what you just said, like calculated ways.
Okay.
and
All
since we all have cell phones, I think we can actually do some actual tech things to help, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
cool. So we'll talk about that some more. It's 9:20, which is our time. So I think that we're at a good place to go ahead and end the meeting. Yeah, we can do it. It's a motion to go.
Motion to go home.
Thanks, y'all.